We are looking at restoring old photographs for the next couple of weeks, and I have here the old photograph that you should have downloaded from Google Classroom. This one's in pretty bad shape, needs some work. I'm going to introduce to you today 3 new tools to work on your photographs with. First thing you'll notice is this photograph is pretty badly faded. This happens over time. Especially if the photograph is left setting somewhere where the sunlight can hit it. It's also got kind of a yellowish brownish cast or tint to it. That also happens to old photographs, old black and white photographs over time. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to restore this photograph, restore the contrast in this photograph. Because if you remember from your portrait section, if your photograph or your portrait has a lot of contrast in it, it gives it a real three-dimensional look. The deeper you make your blacks, the darker you make your shadows, the more they seem to recede into space. And the wider highlights, the wider they are, the more they seem to pop out at you. So having good contrast really makes your photo pop. It makes it look a lot better, makes it look more alive. So in order to bring the contrast back to this photograph, I'm going to adjust its levels. Now we could do this with a adjustment layer. We could use a levels adjustment layer, but I'm not going to do that because we only have one layer in this photograph so far. And I'm going to go up under image, and I'm going to go to adjustments, and I'm going to go to levels here. And if you do this, it only affects the current layer that you're on. Where if you do an adjustment layer, it affects the whole image from that point of the layer down. So we're going to go ahead and just do this layer. So I'm going to go to image, and I'm going to go to adjustments, and I'm going to go to levels. And the first thing you're going to see is a histogram, which this histogram is showing us pretty clearly that most of the pixels in this photograph are right in the middle gray or the darkish gray or the light gray. We don't have any good deep blacks, and we don't have any clean, crisp whites. Everything is kind of between this level of gray right here and this level of gray right here. And it looks, as a result of that, as a consequence of that, it looks very, very flat. This photo has really no dimensionality to it at all. So one way to do this is to set what's known as the black point and the white point. So here in the levels dialog box, if I click on this little icon or this little dropper for this eyedropper icon right here, the one that looks like it's full of black ink, and I find the darkest, or what should be the darkest part of this photograph, probably the shadow right here under his lapel, and I click that, it remaps all of the grays down to the darkest black. And then if I do it with the white, it does exactly the same thing in the other direction. Okay, and I click OK, and poof, look just like that. We've got good contrast back in our photograph. Okay, that's one way to do it. I'm going to do it a different way now. I'm going to use the same dialog box. I'm going to go to menu, I'm going to go to adjustments, I'm going to go to levels. Okay, and I'm going to click on and pull this point here to this point, this little black triangle, and this white triangle into this point, and I'm going to click OK, and that is yet another way to put contrast back into a photograph after it's faded out over time. So we'll undo that, and I'm going to show you a third way. I'm going to go to adjustments, levels, and I'm going to click auto, and auto looks pretty good. Looks about like it did when I did the black point and the white point here. So I'll stick with that one. So there, we've got our contrast back in our photograph. We've undone years of fading. Now the next tool that I'm going to introduce you to is the spot healing brush, which is this tool right here. Looks like a little band-aid. Okay. By the way, this works really, really well at getting rid of blemishes on your portraits. But here's how it works. If I just click and drag over these little spots like so, they just magically go away. Now here's what's really happening. As I do this, the computer is looking all around my brush. It's looking at an area about a half an inch around my brush, and it's looking at all the textures and all of the colors around my brush, and it's pulling all those in and adding them up and averaging them, and then filling the area that is my brush with the average of those textures. So in an area like this, where there's like lots of very similar texture and no real distinct lines or shapes, that technique will work just fine. If you have like a large backdrop or an area of cloth where there's like lots of little white flecks or something, you can do that with the spot healing brush and it will fix that right up. If you try it near the eye, it looked okay, but it's going to kind of look a little weird. There's other better ways to do that. So let me undo those last two. Okay, let's come in under here like so with the spot healing brush. And here. The spot healing brush works best if you do it in very small little dabs. Don't try to do the whole big thing at one time. Okay, very small little, just little short brush strokes, short dabs. Okay. The next tool that I'm going to introduce you to is the clone stamp tool, and it looks just like a stamp right here. Okay, and the clone stamp tool. Oh, before I move on, one last thing about the spot healing brush. This is very useful for removing facial blemishes like acne on your portraits. It's much cheaper than a dermatologist, and it's a lot quicker than Clearasil. So you can clear your portrait up if you want to go back and retouch your portraits. Now, knowing how to use the spot healing brush, you're welcome to go ahead and do that before you print your portrait out. Okay, now on to the clone stamp tool. The clone stamp tool is a two-part tool, and this can get a little tricky, so watch me do this first. I select the clone stamp tool. First of all, I want to make sure I'm actually on the clone stamp tool and not the pattern stamp tool. And I'm going to hold down Option. As soon as I push Option down, your mouse cursor turns into a little crosshair. And what it's going to do is it's going to borrow pixels from this point, and it's going to paint those pixels down where you click the mouse again. So if I hold down Option and I click my mouse and I let go of Option, I've told the program that's where I want to borrow from, and this is where I want to paint to. Okay? So I'll try to get it a little better this time. See there. From here to there. There we go. And I'll do the same thing up here. So resample, hold down Option. Same thing here. Make my brush a little smaller. Hold down Option. Here's what you're really doing. I'm starting to catch the edge of that eye there. Okay, here's what's really going on. I'll do it in a bigger, more exaggerated fashion. If I hold down Option, you notice you get your crosshair. Click my mouse. Then if I paint, it's borrowing from the original eye where I originally sampled, and it's painting down where I sampled. Okay, so I'll just undo that. So if I want to borrow a little bit of the skin from right here, say from right here, to paint down right here, there we go. Same thing here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little further. And I think now I can use the clone stamp tool. There we go. And another one here. Let's try this. There we go. Let's zoom back. Much better. Much, much better. Okay, so we set the black point and white point. We used the spot healing brush to take out this tear in the photograph. We used the clone stamp tool to take out the tear around some of the more detailed areas like the eye and the eyebrow. This is a black and white photograph, and we have kind of a yellow tint to it. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go back to black and white. I'm going to take Image, go to Mode, and I'm going to go to Grayscale, and this should get rid of any yellowish or brownish tint. It asks me if I want to discard the color information, and I toss away the color information. So a little more work on the hair with the clone stamp tool. A little more work on the background there with the spot healing brush. And this one will be ready for print. Okay, we have plenty more, but those 3 tools are enough for you today. Clone stamp tool, spot healing brush, and image adjustments levels, like so.